I am being watched. Welcome, everyone. This is Person of Interest Season 1, Episode 8. It is called Foe. This is my review of the episode, and honestly, this is probably my least favourite episode of the show up until this point. I mean, we're only 8 episodes in, so it doesn't really mean a whole lot, but it's got some merit. I can see what it's doing, much like we've talked about the previous episode. You can kind of see exactly how the main story focus of this episode relates to one of our main characters. It's all about comparing Alan Dale's character, or Charles Wetmore from Lost, for anyone who knows him from that. It's all about comparing how he's this sort of hardcore spy from back in the day, from East Berlin and East Germany, and all the bad things he's done, and kind of like tying that into thinking about the kind of things that Reese has done and maybe the dark past that he has as part of his job. Particularly in that kind of 2007 to 2010 kind of range, from the feelings of it. You know, we have flashbacks back in this episode, and they kind of loosely connect to one of the previous flashbacks where he ran into the girlfriend at the airport, and that's all fine. I think for me, this one, just the actual main story itself just wasn't quite as engaging as most of the other episodes. I appreciate that it was a little bit different again with the spy sort of having a hit list, and he's going for revenge and taking off everyone he used to work with because he believes they all played a part in turning him over to the West, but also kind of getting his wife killed. Although there's a very predictable twist in the episode that his wife's not actually dead, and that she also turned him in and wanted to get away from him because she was scared of him. So you know, and that feeds into like the idea of like, can someone in this life be a good person? Do they feel remorse for what they do? And we're thinking about comparing him to Reese. Like, all those like techniques that it's using are all perfectly good. They're very similar to techniques it's used in other episodes that have worked really well. This one just didn't click quite as well for me, mainly just because I thought all the twists and turns were a little bit straightforward. Maybe part of it as well is that because it had so many targets to go through, it kind of felt like we were kind of speeding through them a little bit, so maybe I wasn't getting quite the same level of intricate like pacing and storytelling building up to the potential moments where he might or might not kill someone. It was nice to see him succeed because that was different, but you know, we were kind of like going through them so quickly that I'm not sure I got as much out of it compared to the other episodes. But that being said, though, obviously there's stuff to talk about with all the characters here. Reese especially. We find out that's not his real name, and it never occurred to me that we hadn't heard him be called Reese in the past. We've heard him be called John. I'm sure his girlfriend back in like episode 1 or 2, when we got those flashbacks of them being in bed and stuff like that, I'm sure she called him John multiple times. But the last name seems to be an alias that he took, and the episode kind of sets that up thematically, because at the start of the episode he says, oh hey, this guy's using an alias, just like I used to. I've used many aliases before. So it set that up at the start of the episode, and it was something that they kind of came back to by the end. At least, at the very least, they heavily implied that Reese was the name that this woman operative gave him in the flashbacks. They cut away, and it's finished that says the name. But, you know, like, if they try and tell me later on that that's not, you know, what that was telling me, I would say that was a bit disingenuous, because I think the edit in there clearly is trying to tell you that that's what the name was. Yeah, the flashbacks itself felt really confined to me because they all took place in this one room. I guess it's kind of similar to the complaints I had with the airport flashbacks that this one kind of connects to, is that because they all take place in one location, and not even, actually, you know what, I'll take that back. It's not even that it's one location, it's that it's one scene split up into 3 things. There's no progression in time really between each part that we see. It's effectively, you know, Reese and this woman who he's now working for go into this sort of courtyardy type area behind a building. They talk about the fact that he's going to be doing work for her now, that he's going to have to give up his past connections, you know, let them all go. And then eventually 2 guys walk in that they're kind of here to get information from, but she ends up killing both of them and makes it clear that this is, you know, like, they're given jobs, these are bad people, and we have an anonymous source that tells us what they did, right? They helped a mass murderer escape or something like that. And I actually for a moment wondered if this was from the machine. The way she said it was from a source just made me kind of click for a second and go, oh, is this like one of the earlier missions that came from the machine itself? But instead of being the the forgotten numbers that Finch like has them look through, this was one of the actual targets that were given to, you know, all the secret agents and stuff that do these kind of things. I was thinking that for a split second, which is a little bit interesting. But by and large, it was all just kind of like it's this one location, this one continuous thing that had effectively been split up into 3 or 4 pieces. And, you know, like, I get the purpose of it. I get that, you know, there were. I guess it just kind of made it feel kind of small. Like, you know, he's getting this effect of not a job interview. He seems to already have the job. In fact, he said he had the job at the airport, and this was what he was on his way to come here and meet her. They say enough in this scene to kind of establish that. So I don't know, like her sort of like saying what the lifestyle of this job choice is going to be, and saying, oh, you can't have connections, you know, you have to leave that world behind. You can never go back to the real world. You know, this is not like before when you were undercover and you were behind enemy lines where you'd go home after a while. This is where you're going to stay entrenched. And it does make me think there's going to be more story about when he was entrenched, you know, officially, because of his job. I wonder if that's something we'll get more flashbacks and probably more stories connecting to. I mean, I guess in a way we kind of already did with the Russian gang. Like, maybe that kind of ties into something he was doing during that time. I do wonder if we're going to get a little bit more of that as the show progresses. But fundamentally, I just like I think the main point of what it was saying was completely fine, but I just didn't think it was all that compelling the way it was telling me the story. It felt like 2 characters in a room, and it was almost like they had to like make it smaller for budget reasons at some point, where someone said, oh, it'd be really good if they were doing this in this great location and they were sneaking into a place or to get to these 2 guys or whatever, and maybe somewhere along the lines it became, no, they're just in effectively a room waiting for 2 people to show up, and the entire conversation is going to take place there. It felt really small and cheap, I guess, and it kind of took away some of the luster that maybe otherwise could have had. The airport scene didn't quite necessarily have that problem because it was an airport, so I didn't feel like it was being cheap. Just by the fact that, you know, it was convincingly looked like part of an airport. But so if anything, this was even worse than that. It wasn't quite as melodramatic, but it did feel like it was hitting all these big points across in what felt like, in the context of what Reese was actually doing over the course of this scene, in a really, really short span of time, which makes some of the, you know, the narrative points that are being made feel forced. The example I would use is that the running thing throughout the episode is that this woman is saying, oh, I have to give you a new name, right? We never find out what his original last name is, but I have to give you a name. And she says, oh, maybe, I can't even remember which one she suggested, but it was like, you know, maybe Smith, maybe Hoskins, maybe this, maybe that. And at the end of the episode, she finally says, oh, I've got it. How about, and then it cuts to Finch saying it. When you actually stop and think about how much time actually passed, like, you know, because they split it up, it felt like it was like a long time trying to think of a name throughout the episode. But when you actually think about how much time that scene actually took, she basically went through 2 or 3 choices and landed on Reese very, very quickly, comparatively. Which isn't necessarily a problem, other than that it just doesn't feel like a big deal, which I guess is what I'm saying about the whole series of flashbacks. So yeah, the plot of this is that we've got Alan Whitmore from Lost. Alan Dale is his real name, but he is Ulrich Kohl in this episode, and he was a spy in East Germany and fled at the end of the Cold War, but was picked up kind of off the books without trial, but his comrades and wife turned him in, and he spent the last 24 years in a secret prison somewhere, but had escaped and has made his way to New York because all of his former comrades all went to the US as part of their deals for turning him in. They've all living new lives. Some have got rid of their accents. Some are just, you know, happily retired architects. One's a lawyer, so on and so on. And we get him going after each of them, and Reese is just kind of a couple of steps behind throughout as the episode goes on. And, you know, the first guy, he just, you know, it's implied that he tortures him a bit, but he effectively just shoots the first guy. The second guy is the lawyer in the restaurant who gets pricked with a needle, which has got, I can't remember the exact chemical, but it's something to poison him. And Reese is able to save him ultimately by giving him something in the ambulance, but We kind of progress through these quite quickly. And when he goes after the third guy at a construction site, it turns out the big reveal here is that the wife isn't dead. The guy makes him phone someone, and it turns out to be the previously thought dead wife, which was his entire inspiration for going on this revenge spree. It was like, oh, it's one thing to turn me in, but it's another thing to kill my wife, and it's been covered up as a car accident. But of course, it turns up it was a cover up, but it was a cover up for someone that never died. It was a faking of one's death so she could go and be someone else, away from him. And that's all, fine. But by this point in the episode, though, we're like halfway through an episode, and we went through like 3 victims. We've had this reveal, and I think from here it's like almost inevitable that there's a kid, right? Like as soon as the wife was revealed, I'm like, oh, she's probably got a kid, and it's probably his daughter. And sure enough, we have this showdown with Reese and Ulrich at the wife's house, right? Finch has already got the wife, they're already, away in a car. And that's maybe one of the successful little swerves, is that the whole episode, Ulrich's been going to a place and like dealing with his target. This is the first time where he's got there and something surprises him. And in this case, it's Reese sitting there waiting for him. So it's a nice little swerve, because the whole episode we have been kind of like, no, nothing's getting his way. He's been successful at everything he's done, and finally Reese and co have got ahead of him a little bit, which they do actually. There's a whole subplot with a German spy or German officer or something. So some guy who's tracking him. Reese runs into him in the first crime scene, beats him up. The police have him for a little bit. Carter and Fusco try to get something out of them, but the embassy shows up. In fact, we even get a diplomatic immunity line at one point, when Reese hits their car with a big sniper rifle, so you can go and question the German guy for a lead because they want to find the wife. The guy from the embassy who's there protecting the German agent is yelling, "We have diplomatic immunity," which always makes me laugh because it makes me think of Lethal Weapon 2 every single time. So that's a long running joke here at Male Fuzz, but that leads him to the wife, right? So I think that's part of why this episode I think is a little less interesting, is because there's so many plot connections that you have to kind of go through. There's a lot of explaining to get from A to B to C to D, and why another character is getting from A to B to C, and that's all fine. But I usually there's a nice balance between that and each thing having its more emotional impact and getting engrossed in the excitement of it. Whereas here, even as I'm describing this and I'm saying, oh, I need to go back and talk about the German agent because that's how Reese finds the wife. There's a lot of moving pieces, and I think it maybe over encumbers the episode a little bit, where I can never really truly get into just what the character story was they were telling, because there was so many pieces to go through of revealing what was going on, who all the players were, so on, so on, so on. But yeah, so Reese does actually get beat quite readily. The old man pinches 2 of his nerves and then spends a lot of time talking about different nerves and different needles and toxins and everything he used to do and all the techniques that he's learned and all the rest of it. But it all kind of boils down to torture and stuff like that. But he discovers that there's a daughter. He discovers a photograph of a young woman about 23, which about tracks with the years, and finds an old photo album, and it's kind of revealed to us here that Reese seems to have already known this. So this is something that Reese and Finch have obviously found out that we have not been privy to as the audience, because Reese has this reaction when he sees the photo where he sort of sighs, oh shit, he's found evidence of her. Almost like maybe they hid all the obvious photos before he showed up to try and not send him down that path of trying to find the daughter. But he has. In fact, he's about to kill Reese. And one of the more interesting little elements of the episode, and I think that kind of boils down maybe the disappointment here a little bit, is that I think both the fact that this old guy is very Reese-like and is able to beat Reese, right? He one-ups him and gets Reese tied to a chair. That feels like it should be more exciting than it actually is. But it's kind of it's kind of a nothing moment in the actual episode. And likewise, I've been very excited anytime there's more connections with characters throughout the episodes. You know, I've been excited when Finch contacts Fusco, and he does that here. This is only the second episode he's done that. But him calling Fusco and saying, "Hey, there's something wrong. I've not heard from our mutual friend. He's at this address. I think that something's wrong. Go help him," kind of thing. And sure enough, Fusco shows up at the last second, right before Reese is about to get shot in the head, which again should be a big deal. He was about to die, and Fusco saved his life. And all of it doesn't feel like it's that big a deal. I think part of the problem is that it was only last episode where, for the first time in the show, Finch got seriously worried that something bad had happened to Reese. It was using all of the possible resources he had, including contacting Fusco, to try and gain a lead and find out what's going on. But that was just the last episode, and that felt like a big deal that he couldn't get in touch with them and he was scared. But in this episode, we go from Reese being one-upped by the bad guy to the very next scene. Finch, it may not be literally the next scene, maybe there's a flashback in between, I can't remember, but it felt like the very next scene, or the next time we see Finch at least, he's calling Fusco and saying, "Yeah, something may have been wrong because I've not heard from my man." That just, it's so quick compared to what happened last episode, where it was this sort of building problem of I can't get in touch with him, we're going to build up the fact that he's genuinely scared about this. Here, the entire thing is played out in as few as possible beats as it could do, and to the detriment of actually feeling like there's anything really at stake or in danger. Reese gets into trouble. The very next scene we see Finch, she's like, "Oh, I think something's wrong, go help him." The very next time we see Fusco, he's there and he's helping, and that's it, it's over. It kind of robs it from any actual drama or tension. And I do think that it feels like a bit of a misstep after last episode bizarrely handled almost the exact same beats. Fusco didn't show up and save him necessarily in the last episode, but the idea of him being missing, Fusco being called in to help, and seeing those interactions and these new dynamics at play, here it was kind of taken for granted, but not in a way that it was oh, now that they've established this connection, he's kind of an ally now you can call upon. It was more just it's the convenient thing for the plot, and it feels like it should be a bigger deal still, and it isn't. And I think it's just down to how this episode is written and how quickly it has to get through everything. Moments like this don't have time to breathe. There's no time to get the sense that Finch, something as simple as he tries to contact Reese and he can't, right? And have him go, "Oh no." But no, we cut to him already knowing that something might be wrong. He's not, but we've skipped over that part. And that's not always the wrong choice. There's definitely points, especially when you've done it enough, where you don't necessarily have to always do those beats, depending on the context. But it just feels so weird to me to already be kind of just brushing past that in this episode. So yeah, none of this felt like a big deal, especially since I think the part that really stings about that is Lionel saves his life. He saves his life and then unties him. And you would think that should be a big moment of oh, Fusco has been very important here. He's someone that maybe we should trust a little bit more because I kind of own my life now. And it just kind of goes past it. It just skates past it without ever really acknowledging it or bringing it up. And maybe it's something they'll call back to later, and that'll be cool. But it's just one of those little things where the episode's speeding by things so quickly that I don't think it really lets any of that land or breathe or anything like that. So, yeah, that'd probably be my biggest critique of the episode. And there's the big final showdown, and again, it's kind of this this negative by comparison to itself, to other episodes of the show, where most of the finales of these episodes where the main person of interest is having their final standoff or their final decision with their story, and it's either try to save someone innocent or trying to convince someone to make the right choice. We've had examples of this throughout the show, and we've had swerves last episode where it's kind of flipped into something else. Here it felt like it was doing something where we have this big standoff in Central Park, and we've got Ulrich with a gun and his wife and the daughter's there. They're here for an exchange because he wants to see her. He'll kill the daughter. And we have this big standoff, and it just it all feels a little bit, I don't know, This was the one that felt the out of all the episodes so far. This is the one that felt the most like just kind of a TV episode in some kind of disappointing ways. And when I say that, I want to say that with the emphasis that I really mean, and that is that I am complimenting how strong the episodes have been thus far. That this one feels as much weaker as it does. Because if this had just been the standard from episode 1, and I was just kind of like, oh, I'm kind of into it, but hoping it gets better, that'd be one thing. I think what's impressed me the most by watching this season so far is how well the individual episodes, while they are very standalone, have held up so far, and how compelling they've been with their main character story. And there's maybe a little bias here. I'm not necessarily as into like old-fashioned spy stuff, so maybe the fact that the guy that we're kind of like after is a spy isn't all that thrilling to me. Although just this year I watched Marathon Man for the first time, which has kind of got some similar vibes to this, in that it's about an old spy from the war days who's now going around New York City, and that movie's excellent. So I wonder if part of it as well is that I just like this feels like a very poor rendition of something similar I've already seen. And obviously that's a big movie with Dustin Hoffman and all that, so this is maybe an unfair comparison, but none of the other episodes by and large have suffered from any comparisons that I've made to anything, whereas this one does feel like the villain's not really menacing enough, and that's probably partly by design, because I don't think he's meant to be someone that, certainly by the end of the episode, I think you're meant to look at him with some degree of empathy. Not that he's not this vicious killer, not that he's been going around and killing people for revenge, but it's more just this idea that he kept going down this dark path that Reese was kind of on already. He did what he was asked for. They make straight comparisons about your country needs you. Both of them heard that when they were kind of recruited into what they do. It wants you to draw these parallels and show you how easily Reese could be this guy. And then of course it's not an accident that the flashbacks bring up the old girlfriend again, and the idea that he had to leave her behind, because that's something that didn't happen with this guy. He tried to keep his wife with him and take her on that journey, and now she sees him as a monster. She's scared of him. She lied to the daughter about how awful he was, but now the daughter knows that he was possibly kind of a monster, and she's going to have to deal with those facts. So it's, I think it's going for a really complex character who isn't necessarily likable, but there is enough complexity to understand that they're a victim of the hand they were dealt, and that there's nuance to like the type of character they're trying to do here, just like there's nuance to the sort of stories they're trying to like tell about John, and they're trying to like fill in his backstory and give you someone who's not just a clear-cut hero or villain, someone who's maybe going for redemption, that kind of thing. I think it's trying to give us a complex character, and I don't think that the episode, because it has to go through so much plot and exposition about what he's doing and who he is, I don't think it ever gets time to actually give us that to the audience, to give us the moments with the character where we could maybe be quite excited to ponder the questions of, is this guy just in what he's doing? Is he owed this revenge in some capacity? Was he wronged by the people that, I feel like if we got really compelling questions posed to us that made us think, I would probably find this episode a lot more interesting. But as it is, I think by the end, it just about serves its purpose in bringing up these questions in comparison to Reese, right? Having them sitting there on the bench as he's dying in Central Park at the end is just enough, and it's made its points throughout the episode, that it functions as an episode of the show to just pose a few things about Reese. But unlike the other episodes, I don't think it was enough to make the character of Ulrich and his story that compelling on its own. So, I guess this is my first sort of more negative review of the show. They can't all be winners though. It's a 22 episode season. I got to episode 8 before I had one that I was more, straight up negative about. So that's not that bad. Like that's actually pretty good. I think some people, when they go to YouTube for commentary or reviews and discussions on their TV shows that they like, some people can be averse to anything negative being said. Some people just want to have, gushing praise for the thing they like. But the show is normally, has up until this point has been very good, and that praise means more if I'll call it out when I think it's under par, when it's not as good. And trust me when I say every show I've ever loved, especially shows that come with 22 episode seasons, they've all got some bad episodes. They've all got some stinkers, and I don't think this is bad enough to be classified as a stinker. This is just more of a middling episode. I can see what it's trying to do, but ultimately I don't think it quite attains it in the way that a lot of the other episodes thus far have. So as a result, I kind of found myself not as excited by the end of the episode and less engaged by it. So that's what I would say there. So there you go. There's not really much more to say, I think, about other stuff. There's another little joke at the start where Reese gets Finch's drink right because he says he doesn't like coffee, and he's like, "Yep, I know, you've got this fancy green tea," and he's like, "Oh, okay." So they're still playing those little beats in car, and that's totally fine. I enjoy that developing relationship. But yeah, so I guess that'll do me. I don't think I have too much more to say. I think ultimately, for me, this is more of a downbeat episode, and hopefully we're back swinging next episode. I did notice the next episode is called Get Carter, which obviously is a reference to an old movie, but it's also interesting to see how that fits in with Detective Carter, and I'm curious to see if this is more of a focus on her for this episode. Oh, I never mentioned that Finch went to a guy who's got all these old Cold War era documents and stuff. I guess because I don't really have much to say about it other than I just kind of shrugged when all this was going on. I don't know. I just for whatever reason that wasn't that interesting to me. But we'll see if that develops. If there's more of that guy, we'll see if it develops. But as of right now, yeah. So weakest episode of the show so far for me. But we'll see you on next week's verse. So. That is Person of Interest, Season 1, Episode 8. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Like, subscribe, all those things do help out a lot. But of course, you can help the most by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting all the content on a monthly basis and help keep it all coming. But that is my thoughts on the show. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?